Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining today. My name is Amanda Meyer, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator here at Estimating Edge. Today, Joe Pettit, who is our Training and Technical Support Specialist, will be covering template items. Before we get started, we have a couple housekeeping items. All lines have been muted and we'll answer your questions after the webinar. To ask a question, enter them into the question window. Joe, next slide, please. Thank you. I will be sending out an email with the recorded link. The recording will also be available on demand on our website. When you leave the webinar today, a pop-up window will open with a 3-question survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. And don't forget to sign up for next month's webinar, which is Recap Markups on December 18th. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Joe, let's get started.
Thank you, Amanda. Some of you may already know what template items are and how they work, but today we'll look at this in more detail. However, I should say that template items are a bit more of an advanced feature in the Edge. So if you're not familiar with database work, you may want to learn some database basics before jumping into template items. So what exactly is a template item? A template item is a one-size-fits-all item. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in other words, it has the same item code, but it has a flexible description and usually different pricing and or production or something else related to that. So how do we use template items in the Edge? Well, most of the material items that you use on a daily basis are already set up to be template items. In other words, their price will change when their description will change for a similar kind of product. Let's go take a peek and see some examples of this. I've got a little fictitious job here that's got both roofing and drywall items in it, so that we'll be able to see this from both a roofing and a drywall perspective. I'm going to go out to the pricing screen, and I happen to be on this TPO item that occurs in my job 3 times. It's an 045 TPO item, and at the moment, it's got a unit price of 70 cents. So what happens if I swap this out and make it an 060 item? I'll come over here to my Replace Tilde Codes button, and I'll change this out to be an 060 item. And the 70 cents goes up to 80 cents a square foot. What happens if I change it back to the 045? It goes back to the 70 cents a square foot. Now, how did that happen? Let's look at this item behind the scenes in the item database. To do that, I click on the particular item in question, and I hit the RI button, which is the replace button. When I hit that, it takes me out to the corresponding item in the item database. And you'll see that this takes me to the single ply membrane or the roll item. Now, what does that item really look like? It really looks like this. The single ply membrane is just a comment. If I didn't have that comment in there, when I saw that item in the item database, it would look like this in its natural state. But by placing a comment in that line item, instead of seeing it with all the tilde codes in there, I see it with the comment in there, which makes a lot more sense to the person normally looking at the database. So what are these things? These little squigglies are what we call tilde codes. You'll find the tilde symbol over by the 1, to the left of the 1 on your keyboard, and you use the shift key to get to it. So this is the tilde code for roll width, and then roll length, and then roll type. This item is already set to be a template item to templatize both the unit price and the part number. When I click edit, I see that the parameters that we're using are roll type, and that's all we need to use because we're pricing it by the square foot. So that's what that item looks like in the item database. Let's take a look at this insulation item. Notice that at the moment, it says it's $50 a square for this 2-inch ISO insulation. What if I use the Replace Tilde Codes button and I change it to a 3-inch insulation? It zeroes out the price. That means that this particular item, although it is a template item, the 3-inch ISO did not have a price in the database. I could put a price in here, and I could send that back to the database, and now in the future, it will come in at 80. But if I change it back to a 2-inch, it goes back to 50. So those are a couple of roofing items that are template material items already. Let's take a look at a couple drywall items that are already template items. Here I have a 20 gauge stud. Notice it says it's 58 cents a lineal foot. What happens if I use the Replace Tilde Codes feature and I change this to a 16 gauge stud? The price zeroes out. What if I change that back? It goes back to the 20 gauge. So how does that work? Well, this stud, and this stud are the same exact item in the item database. When I hit Replace Item on this, and I go out to the stud item, I notice that this is for interior studs. So all of my interior studs that are metal are using the same item. And these are the variables that change its description. My comment just says interior stud, but this is stud gauge, stud width, stud length, and stud type. Those are the variables. If I click on the template button here, or the template tab, I see that we're templatizing the unit price and part number again. We automatically templatize the part number when you templatize the unit price. And back here, you can see the parameters: stud type, stud gauge, with different stud gauges listed in here. We call this a range in the edge. And stud width with different stud widths listed. Once again, called a range. So here's 3 different variables going on at the same time that apply to the price of this stud. Because we're pricing our studs by the lineal foot, the height of the stud has nothing to do with the factors that are needed. And we'll just leave that as is. So that's our stud item. Let's look at another one. This time we'll look at a board item. Notice this is a fire code board, and it's 5/8. All right. If I were to make a change in here, if I were to come in here and change this to 1/2-inch board, then the price automatically changes. If I change it back, It goes ahead and it will change it if I've got it changeable in the database. Let's see how this item is set up in the database. If I were to hit replace item on this, and I come out here, and I open the properties up on this, I see that it is templated, and it is templated based on the board type and the board thickness. If I want to see what unit prices are already set for that item, I just come in here and hit the template lines, and you can see that some of them have a price and some of them do not. Let's take a peek at that TPO item I did earlier. If I hit the replace item on that, and I open up the item properties on that, and I come back to where I can see the pricing, I see that both the 045 and the 060 have prices in there. So this is the multiple items inside the one item, or what I would call a one-size-fits-all, or a template item is what we call it in the Edge. Now, up until now, everything I've shown you is templatizing material. We can templatize labor also. However, by default, most of the labor lines are not templated. In other words, the description may change according to what you do in the condition properties, but the production will stay the same. This will vary according to each database, but let's see how some examples work in the database I'm currently sitting in. Here I have labor for a curb and labor for a wall flashing. At the moment, you'll notice the same production is in both of them. Both of these are actually the same item in the item database. So if I were to come over here and change the production for the curb and or leave the production for the wall flashing as is, let's change that one to 9. And then I send both of these back to the database. Because they're going back to the same line item, and because at the moment they are not templatized, the Edge is going to send that first production back, and then it's going to send the second one back, and the second one is going to be what stands in there. So that if I were to come up here and I were to replace this item with itself, what I find is that it reverts to 9 feet, because that's the last one that was sent back to the database. Now that's fine if I want it that way, but it's not so fine if I don't. How do I change that? How do I make this so that it will be flexible? Sometimes we use the word or the term smart labor in our program related to templated labor lines. So I'm going to templatize this labor line that is currently not templated. I'm going to go out here to my item database, and I'm going to open up the properties on this particular line item. Notice at the moment the description, GCD, Global Condition Description. That's what's changing, so that when I change the condition description from wall flashing to curb flashing to 18-inch, 24-inch, it keeps changing accordingly, but it's not changing the production. So when I click on the Template tab, I tell it that I want to add a templated piece of this, and I'm going to templatize the production rate. Just a hint or a tip, do not templatize the description. That will generally mess you up big time. The only thing in the Edge that has a templatized description is the drywall screws. Other than that, we do not normally templatize descriptions in the edge. This is a labor line. The only thing I really care about is templatizing the production rate. When I click Add, it wants to know what type of condition setup I'm going to be using for that tilde code. And it's a global setup, so I have to come up here and choose global. And then I have to tell it the parameter that's important to me, which happens to be the global condition description. So once I put that in there, I can come in here and put whatever I want in here. In this case, I'll just put a 1. I won't get fancy and try to put different factors in here right now. All right? And that's what you can do whenever you're not sure what to put in there. Just put a 1 in there. Let the edge worry about the rest of the stuff later on. So now I have just set this item up to be templatized. However, the items in my job are still set with their old nature. I need to switch it out with the new nature by refreshing the item with itself. When I do that, notice the production rate zeroed out. I'll do the same on my wall flashing. I'll come in here, swap it out with itself. Now they both have zeros in. Now I can come over here and I'll put my 5 in this one and my 10 in this one, and I'll send these back to the database. By doing that, now what happens, here's the litmus test. I sit on this item, I hit the replace item button, and I swap it out with itself. If it worked successfully, it held. Otherwise, it would have changed to the 10. Let's see what this looks like behind the scenes. When I come back here to the item database, and I open up the properties for this item, and I go to template, I see the production rate is templatized. When I hit edit, I see what's the parameter. And if I hit the template lines button, I see that both curve flashing and wall flashing have a production in there. I did not have to auto-generate these. All I had to do is send them back to the database, and the edge populates that for me as I go. Let's do this again. This time, I'll use a framing example. Notice I've got framing a wall to 10 feet, to 14 feet, and to 18 feet. These are all using the same labor line in the database. At the moment, they all come in with the same production. In this case, I would like to make some different changes in here. So I'll hit the replace item button, and I'm going to templatize this item so that it will change based on my framing height. To do that, notice here's the parameters that are in there: stud gauge, stud width, stud cut length, which is basically my framing height, and then stud centers. When I click template here and I hit add, I tell it I want to templatize the production rate. I tell it add. What parameter do I want to use? I want to use the stud cut length. When I hit add here, the machine wants me to put some different lengths in here. In this case, I know what I want. I want from 0 to 10 to be one production. I want from 10 to 16 to be another production. And I want from 16 to 20 to be another production. If I want anything over 20 to be the same production, I check this checkbox. It's a catch-all checkbox. And then anything over 20 will get the same exact production. If I wanted to ask me or zero it out and make me put it in, I don't check that. So in this case, I won't check that. I'll hit OK. There's my range set up. And then I swap this item out with itself. I'm going to swap this out with itself on all three of these so they all pick up the new parameters that I entered for this particular line item, which in this case will zero out all of their productions. Now I want to set productions. Now remember, I used 10, 15, and 20. I didn't use 14 or 18. That really doesn't matter because anything up to 10 will be one, anything over 10 and up to 16 will be another, and anything over 16 and up to 20 will be another. So these three stud lengths that are here will work fine for my situation. I'll come in here and I'll give this 15 feet per hour. I'll give this one 10 feet per hour. And I'll give this one 5 feet per hour. I'll go ahead and mark all three. And I'll send their productions back to the database. Now let's see if it worked. I'm going to get on my 18-foot wall, hit my replace tilde codes, and change this to a 14-foot wall. No, I'll change it to a 15-foot wall so that it's separate from my other one. And there I go. I changed the wrong one. Let me try that again. There we go. I changed it to a 15-foot wall. Notice it grabbed the same production that was in the 14-foot wall because up to 16 feet is the same one. Now I'll go ahead and change that to a 19-foot wall. Oh, not the stud centers, the wall. So what happens? Now it's a 19-foot wall. It drops down to my 5 feet per hour. Let's see what this item looks like now. Back here, I open it up. I click on the template. It's a production rate that I'm templatizing based on these parameters and that range. When I go to template lines, based on the range, the production is all set back here. If I happen to put in a wall height that is beyond 20, the edge will zero that out for me. Let's show you how that works. Zeroes it out because it doesn't have a production in there yet. Now I can put that in and send it back if I choose to do that. So that's how templatizing works in the Edge. It will be a rare day when you create a brand new item, so we haven't gone over that. Most of the time you'll just be modifying line items, and most of the time it will probably be labors that you're trying to do that with. So that wraps up this webinar. It's back to you, Amanda.
Okay, yeah, good question. Thank you, Joe. Let's get started on some audience questions. The first one is, can you add or change the production rate in the template items?
Yes, you can, although it's usually a little more complex doing it that way, so we don't recommend that. The easier way is to set your parameters and then just put the situation in here. Like, for instance, in this case, let me just say that this was 4 feet per hour, and then I'll send that one back to the database. Now, when I go back to the item database on that item, and I open this up, and I go to Template, Edit, template lines, that 21 feet is in there just like the other ones were, with the 4 in there. All right, so it's probably easier to just set them up, and I can change these. I could turn around and say, I want this to be 8 feet now, 8 feet per hour. I can make any changes like this I want. It will not automatically change the items that are already out there, but new items that come in and are set to those heights will automatically change. In this case, I won't do that. But that's how you change it directly in the database. And you can change a production rate or a unit price if it's material directly in the item database that way. Anything else?
And the next question is, will this work the same way for piecework labor rates?
It can work the same way for piecework labor rates. The important thing is setting the proper parameters up. You don't want any more parameters or any less than you absolutely need. In other words, what is the piecework labor rate based on? Is it going to be based on the board size? Does it care about the board thickness, or is it just the board size? If it's just the board size, then you're going to base it on the board width and the board length only. If the thickness is a factor, then you have to add that in. If the board type is a factor, now that adds a lot more to the mix, because you've probably got 30 different board types from plywood to everything else out there. So every time you add another factor, you've got another possibility of something to make a change in there. So you want to minimize what you set up in there in the parameters to change. Otherwise, it just gets very messy dealing with. But you can do that, yes.
All righty. Thank you very much for attending, everyone. Thank you again, Joe. And I hope everyone has a great day.